Imagine if Brandon was hit with a massive snowstorm. It's so bad that it cannot be cleared for months. The roads in and out are closed, the rail lines are out of service, the grocery stores run out of food, and the hospital is mostly shut down, except for treating mild injuries, because they don't have the supplies to support patients. To get supplies in and out is really difficult, but weekly food and supply shipments are made possible by small plane. The only issue is, the prices of everything are extremely expensive due to the difficulty of getting them into the city. If you have a medical emergency, you have to be flown to Winnipeg. Sounds pretty apocalyptic, right? For over 30,000 Manitobans, they don't have to imagine. This is a reality. Indigenous communities have been facing circumstances like this hypothetical scenario due to climate change, and the situation is only projected to get worse as global temperatures continue to rise. It's crucial to act against this issue now as new governments look to areas nearby affected communities for economic development, creating opportunities for lasting change, which would enable reconciliation as well as environmental stewardship led by Indigenous people in their traditional lands. Many northern Indigenous communities such as Shamattawa, St. Teresa Point, or Norway House are only accessible by winter road, small wing plane, or ferry. Winter roads are temporary roads built by grading the snow on top of either rough terrain or ice. In Manitoba, there are over 2,300 kilometers of winter roads providing the vital access for 22 Indigenous communities. The accessibility in and out of these communities has been severely threatened by climate change, as warmer, faster winters are coming later and melting quicker. These winter roads are vital lifelines for the people of these communities, providing the only way to get food, fuel, and supplies in for most of the year. In the summer, some communities, such as York Factory, are accessible by ferry, but this too has been affected by climate change, as extreme droughts in the last few years in Manitoba have led to unprecedentedly low water levels on major rivers and streams used for transportation up in the north. This renders communities inaccessible by land and water, leaving the only way in and out by small wing plane. Perimeter Aviation is one of the main flight companies with routes to these communities, but flight prices are also very expensive, with a flight to Winnipeg costing about $1,500 round trip from each community. The threats to accessibility on reserve due to climate change are compounding existing issues such as housing availability, food insecurity, and quality of life. For example, housing on reserve is already a scarce resource with long wait lists and many houses in poor condition. Some might ask, why not just fix the housing? This question also reinforces negative stereotypes of Indigenous people on reserve, for example, not taking care of the housing. The issue is there are not resources available to maintain the housing, so the conditions of the existing houses deteriorate, and the option to move new homes into the communities is impossible. Earlier this year, the First Nations of Garden Hill, St. Teresa Point, Red Sucker Lake, and Wasagamag declared a state of emergency as the winter roads did not open until February, meaning the communities were not accessible by land for most of the year, and they were not able to receive a shipment of supplies for almost the entire year. The chief of Garden Hill First Nation, Charles Knott, stated in February 2025 that the community was down to about 1 week's worth of fuel. The winter road was only open for 3 weeks that winter, compared to usual operation time of about 3 months. The communities were also among the most affected by wildfires this summer, only highlighting how vulnerable the communities are due to climate change-related impacts. The state of emergency was declared after the communities proposed the construction of an all-season road, which would connect the 4 communities to the rest of the road system at Barons River and provide sustainable access to essential goods deliveries all year round. The impacts faced by these 4 communities are shared across all the winter road accessible communities in Manitoba. The governments of these communities have been calling for the needs of roads into their communities for years and are citing the urgency is due to climate change. One worry about creating all-weather roads is the cost. Northern Manitoba features extremely rugged and wet terrain, which makes road construction difficult. Much of this land is also underlaid with permafrost, which complicates the long-term maintenance and viability of paved road systems. It was estimated that building a 210-kilometer road connecting Matthias Kalom First Nation community Puckatawagan to the Pas would cost $25 million. The government would have to allocate money for these major infrastructure projects. The winter road system has been utilized as a long-term solution to accessing remote Indigenous communities since the 70s, when non-Indigenous communities in the same areas with the same terrain were getting major provincial roads built. For example, the town of Gillam is located 1,400 kilometers from Winnipeg, is accessible by Provincial Road 280. The town of Shamattawa is located just an extra 200 kilometers from Gillam, but by Winter Road. The two communities have the same population, however, Gillam is the major hub for hydroelectric power generation in the province, which incentivized the construction of a road. Another example is Lynn Lake, a mining community accessible by PR 391. This community would be just 200 kilometers from Puckatawagan, but is only accessible by Winter Road or rail. These communities and their accessibility show evidence that the government has prioritized infrastructure for communities with economic potential over vital access into Indigenous communities. The impacts of climate change and their effects on Winter Road viability will force the government to make a decision, whether to prioritize the lives of Indigenous Manitobans in remote communities or continue to fund other projects. Lives are being seriously affected, but the lack of accessibility also echoes now inactive racist legislation. In 1885, a policy under the Indian Act restricted First Nations from leaving reserve without permission from an Indian agent, which was one of the ways the government stripped autonomy of Indigenous people, controlling their ability to travel. Though this policy was abandoned in 1951, the hesitance for the government to create a reliable infrastructure in and out of reserves echoes the racist nature of this policy, could even be seen as a form of structural racism, which is now being compounded by climate change. It is now more important than ever to build all-season roads into these communities, as it will allow the communities to not just have greater access to essential goods like more affordable food, building materials, stores goods, and fuel, but the increased connectivity will also encourage healthcare providers and school teachers to bring essential services to the community. These vital resources could help Indigenous nations in gaining autonomy, from freedom to travel to also having greater access to both the lands around them, major population centers, and industry. Having access to the industries operating within their lands will allow the nations to have more voice over how the land is being used, while also creating the opportunity for partnerships and economic development for the community members themselves. This increased access also has the potential to help the environment in several ways, as increased access to the lands, the industries exploiting the lands, and major population centers, along with access to basic resources, will enhance the ability for First Nations to steward the lands, advocate for the land, participate in or lead conservation efforts in their area. I think that the government needs to prioritize the access into Indigenous communities by building all-season roads, and I think any Canadians truly interested in reconciliation should know about the issue. Even anyone just interested in the well-being of people should be aware of the issue, just for the fact that the lack of accessibility is directly causing suffering. The timing of political shifts in the country is also important to note, as the provincial government is becoming more aware and prioritizing the needs of Indigenous Manitobans in the north. Mark Carney has also proposed generational projects such as the upgrades to the Port of Churchill, which will be a major boost for the Canadian economy as it creates a direct link of shipping goods from the prairies to global markets without having to go through the U.S. This project in particular will require major infrastructure upgrades, which will concentrate funding toward the remote north. One of the needs of this project will be an all-season road to Churchill from Gillam. The increase in infrastructure, the increase of economic activity of the north, and the concentration in both media attention as well as allocation of federal and provincial funding for infrastructure could create the opportunity for an all-season road construction into more remote communities such as Shamattawa, which would almost be along the way to the road to Churchill. Making this connection could potentially lead to the full-scale construction of a road connecting most of the remote communities on the eastern side of Lake Winnipeg. These solutions are just proposals and will take lots of time and input, and it's important to know of these issues going on so you can help make more informed decisions regarding environmental and social issues in Manitoba. There are lots of questions to be asked about the future of this problem, so I want to hear from you. What do you think about the issue presented in this video? And do you think that the environmental damage caused by building the roads will be worth the long-term benefits to the Indigenous people? Do you believe it could be beneficial to the environment long-term in any way? Why or why not?